The white cane splintered with a sickening crack, its pieces scattering across the concrete steps of the Meadowbrook Community Center like broken bones. 11-year-old Tasha Williams stood frozen, her small fingers still gripping the handle that now led to nothing but air and sharp fragments. "Oops," Officer Martinez said, not bothering to hide his smirk as he nudged one of the larger pieces with his boot. "Looks like your little stick was property damage waiting to happen. Can't have weapons like that around here." His partner, Officer Bradley, chuckled as he adjusted his utility belt. "Yeah, kid, these things are basically clubs. Someone could get hurt." Tasha's breath came in short gasps. The cane had been her independence, her connection to the world beyond her fingertips. Without it, she was an island surrounded by an ocean of uncertainty. Her guide dog, Luna, pressed against her leg, sensing her distress. "That was my cane," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the evening breeze rustling through the oak trees that lined the community center's entrance. "I need it to walk. I need it to—" "Need it to what?" Martinez interrupted, his tone mocking. "Wave it around like some kind of magic wand. This is a family community, sweetheart. We don't need blind kids stumbling around, making a scene." The words hit Tasha like physical blows. She had spent weeks preparing for tonight's HOA talent showcase, practicing her speech about overcoming challenges, memorizing every word in Braille until her fingertips were sore. Now, standing on these steps, where she was supposed to perform in less than an hour, she felt smaller than she ever had in her 11 years. Inside the community center, the sound of families gathering for the evening's festivities filtered through the glass doors. Laughter, conversations, the scraping of chairs being arranged. All of it suddenly felt like it belonged to a different world, one where she was no longer welcome. Her father, Joseph Williams, sat in the third row of the community center's main hall, wearing his favorite jeans and a worn Chicago Cubs baseball cap. To anyone looking, he appeared to be just another parent, perhaps a construction worker or mechanic, waiting patiently for his daughter's performance. The other parents around him chatted about their children's acts, their weekend plans, their complaints about the HOA's new landscaping requirements. Joseph checked his watch. Tasha should have been here by now. She had insisted on practicing her entrance one more time, walking the path from the parking lot to the stage to ensure she knew every step, every potential obstacle. His daughter's determination never ceased to amaze him. At 11, she possessed a strength that many adults never discovered. He glanced toward the entrance, expecting to see her confident stride, Luna at her side, ready to take the stage and deliver the speech that had brought tears to his eyes during their practice sessions at home. Instead, he saw nothing but the empty hallway leading to the main doors. Outside, Bradley stepped closer to Tasha, his shadow falling across her face. "You know what I think you're in violation of several community guidelines. Disturbing the peace with that tapping noise, bringing an unregistered animal onto HOA property, and now destruction of property with this broken stick mess." "I didn't break it," Tasha protested, her voice stronger now, fueled by a surge of indignation. "You broke it. You stepped on it deliberately." Martinez pulled out his citation book, making a show of flipping through the pages. "That's not how I saw it. Kid, my report's going to say you were swinging that thing around recklessly, and it broke when you hit the concrete. Probably going to have to fine your parents for the damage to community property." The injustice of it all made Tasha's hands shake. She had done nothing wrong. She had been careful, respectful, following every rule she had been taught about navigating public spaces. Yet here she was, being treated like a criminal for simply existing in a world that seemed designed to exclude her. "I want to go inside," she said, her voice barely steady. "I'm supposed to perform tonight. My speech is about—" Your speech, Bradley laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the building's facade. You can't perform if you can't see the stage. Sweetheart, what are you going to do? Stumble around up there until someone takes pity on you? The cruelty in his words was breathtaking. Tasha felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet, not from her blindness, but from the shocking realization that adults, people who were supposed to protect children, could be so deliberately cruel. Inside the community center, Joseph's concern deepened. He stood up, scanning the room for any sign of his daughter. The program was supposed to start in 20 minutes, and Tasha had never been late for anything important in her life. He made his way toward the entrance, nodding politely to neighbors who greeted him. Joseph called out Mrs. Henderson, the HOA secretary. Looking forward to Tasha's speech tonight. She's such an inspiration to all of us. He smiled and nodded, but his attention was focused on the doors. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. The same instinct that had served him well during his years as a prosecutor before his appointment to the federal bench. Outside, Martinez was now writing in his citation book with exaggerated care. Let's see here. Destruction of property. That's $150. Disturbing the peace. Another $100. Failure to register a service animal. That's $200. And you know what I'm going to add, reckless endangerment for good measure. That's another $250. Tasha's world was crumbling around her. The numbers meant nothing to her personally, but she understood that her father would have to pay for crimes she hadn't committed. The unfairness of it all was overwhelming. I don't understand, she said, her voice breaking. Why are you doing this to me? I haven't done anything wrong. Bradley crouched down to her level, his voice taking on a mock sympathetic tone. Look, kid, I get it. You think because you're blind, you get special treatment. But this is a community of working families, people who pay good money to live somewhere nice and peaceful. We can't have disruptions. But I'm not disrupting anything. I'm just trying to what? Make everyone feel sorry for you. Use your disability as an excuse to break the rules. Martinez's voice was getting louder now, attracting the attention of a few passers-by who slowed their pace but didn't stop. Well, it doesn't work that way here. The words were like poison, seeping into Tasha's consciousness and challenging everything she had been taught about her worth, her capabilities, her right to exist in the world on equal terms. She felt Luna press closer against her leg, the dog's training preventing her from acting on her protective instincts. Joseph pushed through the community center's main doors, immediately spotting the confrontation on the steps. His daughter stood small and vulnerable between two large men in uniform, her broken cane scattered at her feet like the remains of her dignity. The sight ignited something primal in him, a fury that he had learned to control during his years on the bench, but that now threatened to overwhelm his judicial composure. He moved down the steps with purpose, his footsteps echoing against the concrete. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, though he kept his tone measured. Martinez looked up from his citation book, sizing up the newcomer. "Sir, this is official HOA business. Your daughter here has been causing some problems, and we're just documenting the incidents for our report." Problems. Joseph's voice remained calm, but those who knew him well would have recognized the dangerous quiet that preceded his most devastating courtroom moments. What kind of problems? Bradley gestured toward the broken cane. Destruction of property, disturbing the peace, failure to register her animal, standard violations. Nothing personal. Just doing our job. Joseph knelt beside his daughter, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "Tasha, are you hurt?" She turned toward his voice, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dad, They broke my cane. They said I can't perform tonight because I can't see the stage. They said I'm disrupting the community. The words hit Joseph like physical blows. His daughter, who had spent weeks preparing for tonight, who had practiced her speech until she could deliver it flawlessly, who had chosen to share her story to help other children facing challenges, was being treated like a criminal. He stood slowly, his full height suddenly seeming more imposing than it had moments before. "Officers, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Martinez shook his head. "No misunderstanding, sir. Your daughter violated multiple community guidelines. We're being generous by not having her arrested for destruction of property." The threat against his child's freedom was the final straw. Joseph's demeanor shifted, and something in his posture made both officers take an unconscious step backward. "Arrested." Joseph's voice carried a tone that had silenced courtrooms full of lawyers. "For what, exactly?" Bradley waved his hand dismissively. "Look, sir, I understand you're upset, but your daughter needs to learn that her disability doesn't give her special privileges. This is a community with standards." "Standards," Joseph repeated, the word hanging in the air like a challenge. "What standards, exactly, allow you to destroy a child's mobility aid?" Martinez stepped forward, his chest puffed out with authority. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to step back and let us finish our job. Your daughter was swinging that cane around recklessly, and it broke when she hit the concrete. That's destruction of property." Joseph's years of legal training kicked in, his mind automatically cataloging the lies, the violations of his daughter's civil rights, the clear harassment that had taken place. But more than that, his heart ached for the child who stood trembling beside him, her dreams shattered along with her cane. "I see," he said quietly. "And you witnessed this reckless behavior?" "That's right," Bradley confirmed. "Both of us. It's all going in our report." Joseph nodded slowly. "Your report. And you're planning to submit this report to whom?" Martinez looked confused by the question. "To the HOA board, obviously, and to the county sheriff's office if criminal charges are warranted." "Criminal charges," Joseph repeated, his voice still dangerously calm. "Against an 11-year-old blind girl for the crime of walking with a mobility aid." The sarcasm was lost on the officers, who seemed to interpret his compliance as weakness. Bradley relaxed slightly, confident that he had the situation under control. "Look, sir, I get that this is emotional for you, but the law is the law. Your daughter broke the rules, and there are consequences. Maybe this will teach her to be more careful in the future." Joseph looked at his daughter, seeing the defeat in her posture, the way she had withdrawn into herself. This was not the confident, determined girl who had practiced her speech dozens of times, who had dreamed of inspiring other children facing challenges. This was a child who had been systematically humiliated and broken down by adults who should have protected her. He made a decision that would change everything. "Tasha," he said gently, "I need you to go inside and find Mrs. Henderson. Tell her we need to delay your performance by a few minutes." She looked up at him, confusion mixing with hope in her expression. "But Dad, they said I can't perform. They said I can't see the stage." Joseph's voice carried absolute certainty. "You can and you will perform tonight. I promise you that." Luna guided Tasha carefully up the steps, both of them navigating around the scattered pieces of the broken cane. Joseph watched until they disappeared through the doors, then turned back to the officers. "Now," he said, his voice carrying a new edge, "let's discuss this situation properly." Martinez was growing impatient. "Sir, there's nothing to discuss. We have a job to do, and we're going to do it. Your daughter is going to face the consequences of her actions." "Her actions?" Joseph repeated thoughtfully. Which actions, specifically? Bradley counted on his fingers. Destruction of property, disturbing the peace, failure to register her animal, reckless endangerment. We've been over this. Joseph nodded slowly. And you're confident in your ability to prove these charges? Martinez laughed. Sir, we don't need to prove anything. We're the authorities here. Our word is what matters. The casual dismissal of due process, the arrogant assumption that their word was law, the complete disregard for his daughter's rights. All of it crystallized in Joseph's mind. He had spent his career fighting for justice, and now he was watching injustice being perpetrated against his own child. Your word, he said quietly. Interesting perspective. Bradley was getting annoyed with the conversation. Look, sir, we've been patient with you, but this needs to end. Your daughter is getting these citations, and she's not performing tonight. That's final. Joseph looked at both officers for a long moment, then reached into his jacket pocket. What he pulled out was not what anyone expected. The black judicial robe seemed to unfold in slow motion, its weight and significance immediately apparent even to those who had never seen one before. Joseph slipped it on over his jeans and Cubs cap, the transformation from concerned father to federal judge happening in seconds. The effect on the officers was immediate and dramatic. Martinez's citation book slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, scattering papers across the concrete. Bradley's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Now, Joseph said, his voice carrying the full authority of the federal bench. Let's discuss this situation again. I am Chief Judge Joseph Williams of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois, and you have just harassed, intimidated, and violated the civil rights of my daughter. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the evening breeze seemed to have stilled, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Martinez found his voice first, though it came out as barely a whisper. Your Honor, we didn't know. Didn't know what? Joseph's tone was razor sharp. Didn't know that blind children have rights. Didn't know that destroying someone's mobility aid is a federal crime. Didn't know that what you just did constitutes harassment under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Bradley tried to salvage the situation. Your Honor, there's been a misunderstanding. We were just trying to maintain order in the community. We didn't mean any harm. No harm. Joseph's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his judicial composure. You destroyed my daughter's cane, threatened her with arrest, told her she couldn't perform because of her disability, and issued fraudulent citations. And you call that no harm. The officers exchanged panicked glances. They were in territory they had never navigated before, facing consequences they had never imagined. Joseph continued, his voice returning to its controlled cadence. What you have done here tonight constitutes multiple federal violations. Civil rights violations under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, harassment under the Americans with Disabilities Act, destruction of property, filing false reports, intimidation of a minor. Martinez was sweating now, despite the cool evening air. Your Honor, please, we can fix this. We can make this right. Can you? Joseph asked. Can you undo the trauma you've inflicted on my daughter? Can you erase the moment when she realized that adults in positions of authority would target her because of her disability? The questions hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. But Joseph wasn't finished. From his other pocket, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Bailiff Morrison. This is Judge Williams. I need you to come to the Meadowbrook Community Center immediately. Bring a court reporter and Deputy Marshal Stevens. We have a situation that requires immediate federal intervention. Bradley found the courage to speak. Your Honor, surely we can resolve this without involving federal marshals. Joseph looked at him with the same expression he reserved for lawyers who had just made particularly foolish arguments. Officers, you had the opportunity to resolve this when you chose to harass my daughter instead of protecting her. That opportunity has passed. As they waited for the federal officials to arrive, Joseph pulled out his phone again and began documenting the scene. He photographed the scattered pieces of Tasha's cane, the citation papers that Martinez had dropped, the officers themselves looking increasingly desperate. Your Honor, Martinez tried again. Maybe we got a little carried away. We can make this right. We'll pay for a new cane, drop the citations, write a letter of apology. Joseph's response was swift and final. Officers, you are both under federal investigation for civil rights violations. I advise you to remain silent and contact your attorneys immediately. The arrival of Bailiff Morrison and Deputy Marshal Stevens 15 minutes later was swift and professional. Morrison, a tall African-American man who had worked with Judge Williams for over a decade, immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Judge Williams, he said formally, what do you need? Joseph's voice carried the full weight of his office. I need you to document this scene thoroughly. These officers have violated multiple federal laws in their harassment of my daughter. I want a complete record of everything. Deputy Marshal Stevens, a woman whose reputation for thoroughness was legendary, immediately began taking statements and photographs. The officers, now fully understanding the scope of their predicament, stood silent and pale. But Joseph had one more surprise for them. Bailiff Morrison, he said, his voice carrying a new note of authority. I need you to review the file you prepared earlier today. Morrison smiled grimly and pulled out a folder. The emergency injunction file. Your Honor, the one we prepared after reviewing the surveillance footage from the community center's security cameras. The officers' faces went white. Security cameras. They had been so focused on intimidating a blind child that they had forgotten about the electronic eyes that had recorded their every move, every word, every deliberate act of cruelty. Joseph nodded. That's the one. The injunction that was filed in my court at 4:30 this afternoon after my office received a complaint about harassment of disabled residents in this community. The revelation hit the officers like a physical blow. There had been a plan, a coordinated response, a trap that they had walked into with their eyes wide open. Morrison opened the file and began to read. The United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois has issued an emergency injunction prohibiting any further harassment of disabled individuals in the Meadowbrook community. Violation of this injunction constitutes contempt of court, punishable by immediate arrest and detention. Bradley's voice came out as a croak. But, Your Honor, we didn't know about any injunction. Joseph's smile was cold. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Officer Bradley, and ignorance of a federal court order is contempt, regardless of whether you knew about it or not. Deputy Marshal Stevens stepped forward. Officers Martinez and Bradley, you are hereby notified that you are in violation of a federal court injunction. You have the right to remain silent. As the Miranda warnings were read, Joseph felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was being served, but it had come at the cost of his daughter's innocence, her belief that the world was fundamentally fair. Inside the community center, the talent show was in full swing. But word of the confrontation outside had spread quickly through the close-knit community. Parents whispered among themselves. Children looked worried. And Mrs. Henderson had quietly announced that Tasha's performance would be delayed. Tasha sat in the front row, Luna at her feet, listening to the other children perform. She had heard the commotion outside, the arrival of additional officials, the serious conversations in hushed tones, but she still didn't understand what it all meant. Mrs. Henderson approached her gently. "Tasha, sweetheart, your father is coming inside now. I think he has something to tell you." Joseph entered the community center, still wearing his judicial robe, an imposing figure that commanded immediate respect and attention. The room fell silent as he walked toward his daughter. He knelt beside her chair, his voice gentle but firm. "Tasha, I need to tell you something. Those officers outside, they were wrong. What they did to you was illegal, and they're going to face consequences for it." She turned toward his voice, confusion clear on her face. "Dad, what do you mean they said I broke the rules?" "No, sweetheart. They broke the rules. They broke the law, and they're going to answer for it." Joseph stood and addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to explain what happened here tonight. My daughter was harassed, intimidated, and denied her rights by individuals who are supposed to protect our community. This will not stand." The room erupted in murmurs of shock and outrage. These were parents who knew Tasha, who had watched her grow up, who had celebrated her achievements and admired her determination. The idea that she had been targeted because of her disability was inconceivable to them. Mrs. Henderson spoke up. "Judge Williams, what can we do? How can we make this right?" Joseph's response was immediate. "We can start by making sure Tasha gets to deliver her speech tonight. We can show her that this community values her, supports her, and will not tolerate discrimination." The applause that followed was thunderous. Parents and children stood, clapping not just for Tasha, but for the principle she represented, the courage she had shown, the injustice she had endured. But Joseph wasn't finished. The events of the evening had revealed deeper problems that needed to be addressed. Over the next several days, as word of the incident spread beyond the community, the response was swift and comprehensive. The HOA board, horrified by the actions taken in their name, immediately voted to dismiss the security company that employed Martinez and Bradley. They also voted to establish a new accessibility committee to ensure that all community events and facilities were fully inclusive. The federal investigation that followed was thorough and devastating. Security footage revealed that the officers had deliberately broken Tasha's cane, had fabricated their reports, and had engaged in a pattern of harassment that violated multiple federal laws. But the real test came the following week. At the HOA's annual awards banquet, Joseph had insisted that Tasha attend. Despite her reluctance to be in the spotlight again, the community center was packed, with not just residents, but also local officials, disability rights advocates, and members of the press. As the evening progressed, awards were presented for various community achievements. But the most significant moment came when Mrs. Henderson took the stage to make a special announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "recent events have shown us that our community has work to do. We have failed one of our own, and we must do better." She gestured toward Tasha, who sat in the front row with her father. "Tonight, we are announcing the establishment of the Tasha Williams Accessibility Center, a facility that will serve as a resource for individuals with disabilities and their families. This center will be funded entirely by the HOA, and it will serve as a reminder that every member of our community deserves respect, dignity, and full participation in our shared life." The applause was overwhelming, but Joseph noticed that his daughter seemed uncomfortable with the attention. She had never wanted to be a symbol or a cause. She had simply wanted to be a child who could participate fully in her community. But the evening's surprises weren't over. As the formal program concluded, Mrs. Henderson returned to the stage with one more announcement. Before we end tonight's celebration, we have one more presentation. Tasha Williams had prepared a speech for our talent show last week, but circumstances prevented her from delivering it tonight. She's going to share that speech with all of us. Tasha looked up at her father, uncertainty clear on her face. "Dad, I don't know if I can—" Joseph's voice was gentle but encouraging. "Sweetheart, your words have power. They can help other children who face challenges. They can help this community understand what it means to be inclusive." With Luna at her side, Tasha made her way to the stage. She had memorized her speech weeks ago, but the events of the past week had given her words new meaning, new weight. She began to speak, her voice clear and strong. "My name is Tasha Williams, and I am 11 years old. I am also blind, but that is not the most important thing about me." The room was completely silent, every person hanging on her words. "I used to think that being blind meant I was different from other kids. I thought it meant I couldn't do the same things, couldn't dream the same dreams, couldn't contribute to my community in the same ways." She paused, her voice growing stronger. "But I've learned that being different isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to be proud of. We all have challenges, and we all have strengths. My blindness has taught me to listen more carefully, to think more deeply, to appreciate things that others might take for granted." As she continued, her speech took on a power that no one had expected. She spoke about resilience, about the importance of standing up for what's right, about the responsibility that communities have to protect their most vulnerable members. "Last week, I learned that not everyone believes disabled people deserve respect. I learned that some people think we're burdens, that we're problems to be solved, rather than people to be valued." Her voice never wavered, even as some in the audience wiped away tears. "But I also learned that there are people who will fight for us, who will stand up when we can't stand up for ourselves, who will make sure that justice is served. I learned that communities can change, that people can grow, that even in the darkest moments, there is hope." She concluded with words that would be remembered long after the evening ended. "I don't want to be special because I'm blind. I want to be special because I work hard, because I care about others, because I try to make my community better. I want to be judged by the content of my character, not by the limitations others assume I have." The standing ovation that followed was unlike anything the community center had ever seen. People were crying, cheering, embracing each other, but most importantly, they were seeing Tasha not as a symbol or a cause, but as a remarkable young woman who had overcome tremendous obstacles with grace and dignity. As the applause continued, Joseph felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Deputy Marshal Stevens, still in her official capacity, but with a warm smile on her face. "Judge Williams," she said quietly, "I thought you should know. The officers who harassed your daughter have been formally charged with federal civil rights violations. They'll be appearing in your courtroom next week." Joseph nodded, his expression serious. "Thank you, Deputy. Justice will be served." But as he watched his daughter on the stage, still basking in the warmth of the community's support, he realized that the most important justice had already been served. Tasha had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, her place in the community. She had transformed a moment of cruelty into an opportunity for growth and understanding. The weeks that followed brought continued changes to the Meadowbrook community. The Accessibility Center was built with unprecedented speed. Becoming a model for other communities across the state, Tasha became its first junior ambassador, helping to develop programs for children with disabilities and their families. Martinez and Bradley were convicted on multiple federal charges and sentenced to significant prison terms. Their case became a landmark in civil rights law, cited in legal textbooks, and used to train law enforcement officers across the country. But perhaps the most important change was in the community itself. The events of that evening had forced residents to confront their own assumptions and prejudices. They had seen how quickly a child could be victimized, how easily injustice could occur, and how important it was to remain vigilant against discrimination in all its forms. 6 months later, Tasha stood once again on the steps of the community center. But this time, she was not alone. Around her were dozens of children with various disabilities, all participating in the first annual Meadowbrook Accessibility Fair. She had a new cane, stronger and more beautiful than her old one. And Luna was at her side as always. Joseph watched from the crowd, no longer in his judicial robes, but in his favorite jeans and Cubs cap. He was proud of his daughter, not just for her resilience and courage, but for her ability to transform tragedy into triumph, to use her experience to help others. As Tasha addressed the crowd, welcoming them to the fair and explaining the various accessibility resources available, Joseph reflected on the journey they had taken together. It had been painful, difficult, and at times heartbreaking, but it had also been transformative. His daughter had learned that the world could be cruel and unfair, but she had also learned that justice was possible, that communities could change, and that her voice had power. She had discovered that being different was not a weakness, but a strength, that her unique perspective and experiences gave her something valuable to offer the world. As the fair continued around them, with children of all abilities playing together, learning from each other, and celebrating their differences, Joseph knew that the real victory was not in the courtroom or in the punishment of those who had wronged his daughter. The real victory was in the laughter of children who had learned that diversity was beautiful, in the tears of parents who had discovered new hope for their children's futures, and in the quiet confidence of a young girl who had faced injustice and emerged stronger than ever. Tasha Williams had set out to deliver a speech about overcoming challenges. Instead, she had overcome challenges that no child should have to face. And, in doing so, she had changed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. As the sun set over the Meadowbrook Community Center, casting long shadows across the accessibility fair, Joseph smiled. His daughter had found her voice, claimed her place in the world, and shown everyone what it truly meant to be strong. The broken cane had been replaced, the charges had been filed, and justice had been served. But more importantly, a community had been healed, a child had been empowered, and the world had become a slightly better place. And that, Joseph knew, was the most important victory of all.